was clear to everybody at that point, so nobody really bitched about it, at least not to me, but it was pretty obvious.
This takes us to the Great American Bash, and up to this point, the guys are nameless, but they still come out to a big babyface pop. And then you guys go out of your way to say they do not work with the WWF, and they accept your challenge for Bash at the Beach, and then Hall punches you in the stomach, and Nash power bombs you through a table. Eric, is this your first bump? Whose idea was it? Did you walk through it that day? What can you tell us about this?
I think it was my first bump. And it was my idea, and no, we didn't walk through it. I'm kind of superstitious about rehearsing things like that, physical issues, especially ones that are scary or dangerous, I should say. I figured if I was going to get hurt, I'd rather get hurt on a live pay-per-view and have it make some sense and be worth something, as opposed to getting hurt in a rehearsal and have to rewrite it. So I didn't rehearse it. I was pretty confident that I walked me through, my end of what I needed to do to get into that power bomb position for him. We rehearsed that a couple times, maybe right before we went out.
I see you found those shrines Faith built. They're all along that pilgrimage they got going on. They all have some fucking Peggies gathered around.
Meltzer said the crowd popped, and the other half was shocked. At this point, it had never really been acknowledged on TV that you were running things. Are you happy with the way it was pulled off, and what was the reaction amongst the boys when they see the boss taking a power bomb through a fucking table?
How people, the boys, as you put it, how they really felt and what they expressed to me were, by this time, usually two different things. I know how I felt. I was elated. I knew it was a big damn deal. And again, because it had never been done before. Not that I was the boss, but even as an announcer, the announcer would get back a little bit, or maybe pushed up against the table. Maybe somebody even slapped one once. I don't know. I'm not a wrestling historian. But nobody ever bombed them on the stage before. I'm pretty sure that never happened before. So again, it checked the box. Be as different as we can be from everything that's ever been done before. And I knew it as soon as I got up and, I got carried back, to the locker room, and I went, wow, everything's still in place. I can move my fingers, I can move my toes, I can move my neck, everything's good. But I could feel the reaction from the crowd, and it was pretty intense. And, I still had a lot of adrenaline going through my system at the time too, so I felt really good about it.
It's worth mentioning, the week before this happens, Raw did a 2.6 and Nitro did a 2.7. The night after the powerbomb happens, Raw gets a 2.3 and Nitro gets a 3.4. I'd say it worked, wouldn't you?
It got people talking. It was a lot easier to get people talking back then than it is now, so we definitely got a buzz. Water cooler talk, that's what they used to call it.
One of my questions, though, is there's no Hall and Nash on that show. So the night after this big power bomb, they're not on the show. What's the thinking there?
Less is more.
Yep.
I learned that along the way. You don't have to cram everything you've got down the audience's throat every week just because somebody said you should. Sometimes making people anticipate and make them wanting to see follow-up is worth more than doing it just for the sake of doing it. And that was the case back then.
Meltzer reported, quote, after the 2.6 rating for Nash's debut, Sullivan was totally in the doghouse to the point he wasn't even invited to the booking meeting on June 11th, and there was considerable speculation that his days were numbered. By the next day, though, things were back to normal, although Sullivan had to agree to give up being an active performer after his current program finishes to keep his booking job. Of course, after this week, he's the company hero. What really happened here? We haven't really heard you talk about Kevin Sullivan much, and I'm curious, what caused him to be in the doghouse? Why did you give him the edict he had to stop wrestling? And how did he turn things around, at least in your mind?
I honestly don't recall if it was a major incident or not. It could have been any number of things. I do remember I didn't want him wrestling in the ring. All you have to do is go back and look at some of his matches back then, and you can figure out for yourself why that would be. They were pretty flat out horrible. And then there was the conflict, the inherent conflict of the booker also being a talent, which had been an issue previously. It was an issue with Ric Flair. It was a very difficult thing for Ric to be the booker and also be, especially at Ric's level in the main event, as regularly as it was. And I didn't want that. I figured that out by then, that it was just not going to be healthy. If there was anything else kind of contemporaneous to that, I don't recall.
Hypothetically, do you think if Kevin Sullivan would have kept wrestling that he would have beat Goldberg at Starrcade 98?
If he would have stayed the booker, he would have.
I mean, that's the way it went down. So after this, Titan was sending letters to both Hall and Nash, to the point that Hall hooked up with Hogan's attorney, Henry Holmes, to defend him in this Razor Ramon mannerism case. And his argument really is accurate, in my opinion, that a lot of that stuff really started with the Diamond Stud character, and he wants Henry to go help him collect the money that's owed to him by Titan. And eventually a lawsuit is filed by Titan Sports on June 20th, and they're asking for a restraining order against both Turner Broadcasting, WCW, and Eric Bischoff. And the lawsuit essentially had 4 counts. The first was unfair competition, claiming WCW had used false and misleading descriptions of fact that likely were to cause confusion in the marketplace and deceive consumers that Titan was somehow affiliated with this angle. The second count was trademark and trade distress infringement and false designation or origin regarding WCW using the trade and dress persona of Razor Ramon, which was a Titan trademark. The third count was Connecticut unfair competition and constant disparagement of Titan Sports on television and on its hotlines as either an unfair or deceptive act. And the final count was defamation and libel, stemming from the February 5th show, way before these guys were here, when the lights went out at a live Nitro in Lakeland, Florida. You and Steve McMichael were making comments sort of insinuating that maybe the competition had something to do with the power going out, but you apologized the following week. Now the silliness here is Titan wants TBS and WCW to fork over all the profits from the June and July pay-per-views and then pay triple those profits as damages plus their attorney's fees. I know you sort of said earlier they kept you away from this, but when did you first hear about the lawsuit? What was your reaction? What was WCW's reaction?
It really wasn't so much WCW's reaction as it was Turner Broadcasting's reaction, because at this point, and again, it's important, I think, that people need to understand a couple things. Nick Lambros was an attorney who worked in my office and handled all things legal. He negotiated the details of the contracts. He would handle lawsuit issues. He really reported to the legal department of Turner Broadcasting. He had a dotted line to me, and I know you know what that means. But to our listeners, if you looked at the WWE flow chart, the WCW organizational chart, or flow chart as it's sometimes called, you would have had me at the very top as a president of the division, and you would have had different people underneath me, senior VPs, executive VPs, that type of thing. And then on that next level, on that senior VP, executive VP level, you would have had Nick Lambros, who was probably vice president of legal affairs. The line between myself and Nick Lambros was a dotted line. It was not a direct line, meaning Nick Lambros didn't work for me. I couldn't influence Nick. I couldn't tell him what to do. I couldn't fire him. I couldn't tell him who he could hire, who he couldn't fire. All of that was between him and the legal division of Turner Broadcasting. So once that WWF lawsuit came down, it didn't land on Nick Lambros's desk. It landed on Turner Broadcasting's desk in their legal department. And then it got down to Nick, and then it came to me. So I wasn't reacting to the letter as much as I was reacting to Turner Legal. And they took it very seriously. They knew that they knew it was going to cost them money. So of course they got very, very interested. And I had to react accordingly.
WCW's attorney David Dunn squared off against the WWF's attorney Jerry McDivitt in a Connecticut court for 2 hours on June 24th. Eventually, Judge Dorsey said he didn't have time to dedicate to this because he was in the middle of a major organized drug crime case, so it was delayed until the second week of July, which means it's after Bash at the Beach. The WWF is not happy with this and plan to pursue other options to stop it. But in this same 2-hour span, WCW's attorney Dunn brings up that 41 other wrestlers have jumped ship in the most recent few years, and 28 of them basically use the same name and persona, and that Hall's mannerisms were actually in place in WCW first under his original Diamond Stud character. McDevitt said that if Vinny Vegas and Diamond Stud were joining WCW, the WWF had no issue. And eventually the judge asked Dunn to have WCW play down the Ramon character, and WCW's attorney agrees, provided that the WWF will not sue based on the July 7th pay-per-view. Of course, McDevitt doesn't go for that. And he also says if he had Eric Bischoff on the stand, he just needed to ask him 10 questions to prove his case. Did you ever hear that? Are you getting updates from court? Did this go as you expected? What can you tell us about this court date?
I was getting a general update in terms of what we could do and what we couldn't do moving forward. I wasn't getting blow-by-blow details of who said what McDevitt's, reactions to certain things were. I didn't get the detail that you just gave me, let's put it that way, because it wasn't a matter of public record, or at least not accessible as such at that point. But I had a pretty good idea of what went down, and again, we were reacting to what we needed to react to for Turner legal.
McMahon sends out a press release after this, and I sort of laughed at this when I read it, if I'm honest. He says he regretted filing the suit, but, quote, "I've finally been pushed up against a wall with no other options but to protect my company. My wife and I have committed our adult lives to building the World Wrestling Federation. This company competes very well, and I dare say stays ahead in a marketplace where the quality of programming, creativity, start development, and consumer interest reflects success. However, when a giant competitor uses your very own creations to dupe and confuse the public, then the playing field isn't level, and you're forced to fight in a different arena." Did you see the statement? What was your reaction?
Bullshit. Tell that to Vern Gagne. Tell that to
Jim Crockett.
Tell that to every promoter that Vince McMahon put out of business. With the way he did business and stealing talent, and raiding territories, and killing buildings. These poor little old mom and pop promoters put out of business by this multi-generational behemoth called the WWF. 3 generations old, my God, my grandfather started this company. Yeah, I felt really bad about that. And you can tell to this day I'm still carrying much of that over with me. I told him, kidding aside, I wish we would have had, attorneys that were willing to fight, and were smart and determined and passionate about that fight, as Jerry McDevitt and his team was. It was a bullshit lawsuit, in my opinion, for a lot of reasons. I understand why he did it, because he had no choice, because we were stomping him, and he felt like that was the only thing he could do, and he was desperate, and he won. So good for him. But I didn't agree then, and I agree to this day for the suit. But it doesn't really matter. Suits are not often won, or not always won, by who's right or who's wrong. It's who's willing to stick out the fight the longest.
Meltzer would write, WCW officials claim that they are researching trademarks for current planned new ring names for Hall and Nash. If the name's clear, they'll be given those names as soon as possible. If not, on the July 7th pay-per-view, they'll be referred to by the announcers as Kevin Nash and Scott Hall. I know you said a moment ago you always wanted them to use their real name to give it an air of realism, but this lawsuit sort of cements that that's the direction you need to go and really supports that idea, does it not?
It does, but I don't know how accurate that element of the lawsuit was. I don't think there was a lot of conversation between myself and the legal department when it came to, I certainly didn't talk to them about what I was thinking and what I wanted to do back in May at that point, because there wasn't the issue, or at least not to the extent that it is at this point. I can't put myself in David Dunn's mind and why he wrote what he wrote or took the position he took, but he did.
Let's talk a little bit about the lawsuit, because one of the things I saw in my research is that they're really debating things that were said on the hotline, which was hilarious to me. But it comes up a lot in court, to the point that allegedly legal required Mark Madden to start submitting his scripts before it was his day on the hotline 3 days ahead of time, so they had a chance to approve it. Do you remember there being some fallout for the WCW hotline, as silly as that is?
Where did that come from? Just out of curiosity.
It's got to be Meltzer or Killer.
Yeah. First of all, legal wouldn't, legal may, and again, this is trying to...
22 years later, yeah.
No, it's not even 22 years later. I'm now trying to add credibility to a Dave Meltzer or Wade Keller report, which we've already discovered in this podcast. Some of it was just nonsense and bullshit. So if they wrote it, and if there was a kernel of truth in that, here's what I suspect. Mark Madden was hard to manage. Mark Madden often went into business for himself. I will readily admit that there were things that Mark Madden said on that hotline that caused any number of issues, some big, some small. So it's not inconceivable to me that there's some truth to that report. I don't think anybody would have requested a script, but certainly they might want to be well aware of what kind of topics are going to be covered and how.
Let's talk a little bit about the lawsuit again, and then we'll put a bow on it for now. Is it true this fucking thing went on for 4 years and wasn't until 2000 when it was finally settled?
I don't know. Again, I wasn't involved in the details of the suit, other than, when I had to be deposed, or when in the process of discovery I had to turn over my records, or whatever I had to do as my part in that. So I can't tell you how long it went on and how it was settled and what the settlement was, because I wasn't a part of it. It was handled by a whole universe of people that I didn't talk to on a daily basis or a regular basis.
Okay, Eric, let me pause the action here to thank one of the sponsors of our show, and I think our wrestling listeners are really going to dig this one. Nitro, the incredible rise and inevitable collapse of Ted Turner's WCW is set to be released on July 6th. With the inside knowledge of a journalist, the perspective of a historian, and the passion of a fan, author Guy Evans provides a fresh look and an unfortunate inevitability, the downfall of World Championship Wrestling. Bolstered by exclusive interviews with over 120 TBS and WCW employees, Nitro contains a host of new revelations, including never-before-heard details of the controversial WCW sale, purported sabotage allegations, top-secret Turner executive meetings, confidential TBS memos, and what the suits really thought of wrestling on TNT in their own words. Notable interviews include Eric Bischoff, former TBS president Bill Burke, Kevin Nash, Diamond Dallas Page, and many more. Here's your website to pre-order. It's WCWNitroBook.com. That's WCWNitroBook.com, and follow them on Twitter at WCWNitroBook. At the end of the June 24th Nitro from Charlotte, Hall and Nash come through the crowd, this time with baseball bats, and that brings out a ton of cops to protect Sting, Luger, the Steiners, and the Harlem Heat, who are in a three-way tag team match. Eventually, Hall and Nash retreat to the back rather than going through the crowd. In hindsight, was that a mistake to have them go through the back instead of through the crowd?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's fair. Probably a detail, an element of that angle that would have improved it had they gone through the crowd. I'll take that one.
Kevin Nash has told a story where he's in the back and they're being told by Turner standards and practice that they couldn't use bats. And Kevin Sullivan was standing there and said, "Do not use baseball bats," but he was shaking his head yes the entire time while he's saying that. Do you guys remember getting in any sort of trouble or any sort of conversation with Turner afterwards about carrying the bats to the ring after they'd specifically said not to?
Probably. There was a constant struggle between myself, other people within WCW, in the creative side of things and standards and practices. So, yeah, I don't remember the details of it, but it sounds like it probably happened. And it sounds like something to do.
It also sounds like something that you could be fired for, and you know a thing or two about firing people, which is why we've got a brand new shirt over at ericbischoff.com. That's right, t-shirts for the podcast. Who'd have thought? Check it out right now at ericbischoff.com, and maybe the best debut shirt of all. You've heard about the famous way that Steve Austin was fired by FedEx? Well, we've got a shirt that says fired in the FedEx font and colors. This is the most fun shirt ever. Pick it up right now over at ericbischoff.com. We've also got a couple of other shirts, maybe one of my favorites, Easy Does It. And it's in that old school Easy E font. And eventually, when you pick up a shirt from ericbischoff.com, what's going to happen, Eric?
I'm going to get a call. I'm following in Bruce Pritchard's lead. He is my podcast spirit animal. Out with his tracks. You made him a wealthy man, Mr. Thompson. So I always read that if you want to be successful, other successful people. So that's what I'm going to do.
The show, of course, is being brought to you free today. We appreciate you tuning in. Tell your friends to click the subscribe button and go ahead and leave us a review as well. But while you're at it, pick up a shirt, and then you can pick Eric's brain and grill his ass just like I am too. So you're not just getting a shirt, you're getting a great experience. It happens at ericbischoff.com. This fire shirt might actually be my favorite podcast shirt ever. So go check it out for yourself. Oh, there you go. Kevin also says this night that you sort of made WCW look really weak since 2 WWF guys with bats could hold off 6 of WCW's top stars. In hindsight, is that fair?
It's psychology, and psychology, like beauty, is in the eyes of the beholder. I think it could be interpreted that way. I think you really, you're splitting hairs. I think you need to put the whole thing in context. I think it has to be measured against what happened the following week, what the follow-up was. In retrospect, sure, we could have had all those WCW guys just beat the hell out of Hall and Nash, take the bats away from them and beat their brains out. Might not have got us where we wanted to be. You can only put so much logic in a wrestling storyline before you're doing a documentary and nobody cares.
Let's talk a little bit about the go-home edition here of Bash at the Beach. It's Nitro, of course, and it's July 1st. It's in Landover. Nitro's going to do a 3.7. Raw's going to do a 2.7. And this is the first time you actually refer to them by their names on TV. And they come out to start the second hour to a bit of a babyface reaction, and they sit in the front row eating popcorn. And later, they get a police escort to their car with Nash mocking them, but no interaction with their opponents that week. What's the thinking here? This old school, let's not let them touch. If you want to see it, you've got to buy the pay-per-view?
Part of it, it's also character development. It was furthering that storyline. They were disrupting WCW. They were there to turn it upside down. They were there to be a pain in the ass. Nothing really more to it than that. It was just to help build their characters.
One of the other things I've always wanted to ask is how you guys went about selecting who was going to be the opponents. Who was going to be the WCW representation. Mean Gene announced that it's going to be Randy Savage, Sting, and Lex Luger. And it's been said that there were really 6 in consideration: Giant, Sting, Lex, Savage, Flair, and Hogan. Now we'll circle back to Hogan later. Let's save that one for now. Why not Flair? I know that it sounds like a homer when I say that. I get that. But to me, Flair was really like the WCW guy. And if they're going to be out there sort of mocking that they're old and that it's Southern and redneck and blah, 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 Flair being sort of the Southern representative of wrestling seemed to make sense to me. Why did you decide ultimately to go the other way and go Sting, Lex, and Savage?
2 reasons. One is something to go back 8 seconds ago. One of my favorite questions back in the day when bookers or writers or people on the booking committee would come to me with an idea. The first question that was great. Where's it going to go? that's usually what you heard. Absolutely nothing, because people weren't thinking about what happens next. And I knew, look, where was WCW? WCW was Ted Turner was at that point. But we needed someone to go down the line. That was one reason. The other reason, quite frankly, is I wanted to see you a little bit younger. One of the challenges that we had in WCW at that time, from an advertising point, the business of the wrestling. Not the wrestling fans, but the business side of the advertising. Whether you had to skew broader or to skew younger. And that's exactly what I wanted to do with the WCW division, I guess, of that equation. To go as young as I could and leave fair, on reserve in my back pocket so that when we sure the next level, he was there. He wouldn't have been allowed to go down.
Let's talk about the week leading up to the match at the beach, because Meltzer says the original plan was for Lex to be the third man. But there's also rumors out there about Tatanka, Mabel, Crush, Brian Clark, Roddy Piper, Isaac Yankem, the British Bulldog, Bret Hart. At any point were any of these names ever discussed?
Thinking about using Meltzer's mother, but she wasn't available. No, that's so ludicrous. And people wonder why I get hot. People wonder why Bruce is here. There's a perfect example of the legacy of Dave Meltzer. Where those things came from, I have no idea. None. Absolutely none. There's nothing that he has ever printed that could be more stupid, more ludicrous, and more untrue than that. That's saying a lot.
Let's talk a little bit about Bret Hart, just briefly. Because there's rumors, because his contract is sort of up for grabs, and you're going to be competing very soon for it. Was Bret Hart ever considered? Were you having any conversations? I mean, had you even spoken to Bret at this point about anything? Not necessarily this angle.
First, you asked two questions. The first answer is absolutely friggin' not. Bret Hart was never a syllable of a syllable in any statement that was any part of any conversation as an option. Never happened.
It's me.
Now
Now
you
listen here and you listen good.
Had I talked to Bret, I don't think at that point I talked to Bret. I mean, I think I met Bret after that for the very first time. But no, at that point, it was never. The only other person that was, to me, it was always going to be the three that I chose. And Sting was going to be the guy that was going to turn, because I wasn't sure about Hulk. And I know you want to talk about that later on. But I wasn't looking for anybody outside of that equation. I wasn't looking at anybody from the WWF. I wasn't looking at Dave Meltzer's mother. I wasn't going to hire, anybody that I knew from high school. None of that. It was always going to be internal.
Okay, let's actually get cooking here. You wrote this in your book about Sting. We spent 4 or 5 weeks developing the idea, giving hints and laying the groundwork, and we planned to unveil the third guy at Bash at the Beach. I didn't know myself. It had to be someone inside WCW, but beyond that, I wasn't sure. I decided to approach Sting, but I didn't know if he'd do it. Joining the Outsiders meant he'd have to turn heel, and Sting had always been a very successful babyface character. Sting was receptive, not knock me over enthusiastic, but receptive. Everyone could see the power in this storyline was developing. Just a few weeks old, it was already one of the most interesting stories in the last 5 or 10 years, and we began discussing how the storyline might develop. I talked to him a couple of times in person and over the phone. No one else knew we were talking, not even Scott and Kevin. The identity of the third person had to be kept an extremely tight secret. I've always been curious about this, and everybody has their own opinion, Eric. How might the business have been different if Sting had been over the moon about the idea, and when you tell Kevin and Scott they're both pushing for it? Before you ever speak to Hulk,
if you're up for it.
If all three guys were super enthused about
around
it,
the marina. Locals call him
what
Ragnar.
might that look like?
People have been trying to catch old Ragnar for ages, but he's damn
Hypotheticals are always
stubborn.
hard.
He likes to hang out by that little island over yonder. It'd be good for morale if someone finally caught him.
Who knows?
I think you might have what it takes.
Is there a chance that Anger's going to get even hotter? Maybe somebody has that. Maybe somebody has that opinion. I don't. In my opinion, it would have been good. It could have even been borderline great. But I don't think it would have been something that we'd be talking about 20 some odd years later.
Yes, I'm Herc's mom, and no.
Well, let's get to what we're here for. Allegedly, you visit Hulk Hogan at his house to pitch him on an idea of turning heel, and he basically showed you the door. This is a pretty famous story. Was this before or after you had the idea for the NWO?
Oh, was it like a year? Well, the idea was kind of forming in my head. And again, as a result of being over Japan and trying to do something that felt more real, as well as, you know, back when, now we're skipping around the timeline, so it's easy to get things a little confused, at least for me, even with all this caffeine.
We all used to fly together.
I think it was about a year
that
before
friendship went tits up after those
that I
thunder
pitched
cunts
Hulk,
joined Eden's Gate.
the idea of turning heel, partly because
shoot them
the
in their disloyal
babyface
faces.
red and yellow thing just wasn't
How
working.
about it, honey?
I mean, it
You help
wasn't.
me,
Hulk
and
knew
Tulip
it.
and I
I
will
knew
show
it.
up wherever and whenever you need us.
Sure, you could go to center stage, or you could, you know, do a Clash of the Champions, and you'd get your requisite, you know, Pavlovian, you know, response for certain people at ringside would cheer. They wear their yellow shirts and, you know, swing their yellow foam fingers and all that. But the largest majority of the audience weren't buying it anymore, and it was apparent to everybody. And again, I knew we had to do something different. So I went to Hulk's house. I flew down. I had my own plane at the time. I flew down, met him during the week, middle of the afternoon. We sat and had a talk, probably had a beer, everything. You know, we had a really good relationship. And then I went into my pitch. And he very politely